hanging out in my shop today, and I had a very good friend stop by, my friend Amy. Actually, Amy took our Northford Timber Frame class about 10 years ago, and happy to have you stop by this morning. Amy, what's up?
Thank you. Good morning, George.
Good morning.
I have a few friends that are interested in taking class this year. I was wondering if there was some few questions I could ask you.
Absolutely.
Excellent. When did you first become interested in timber framing?
1975. I had always had an interest in doing something different. I was a carpenter back then, kid just out of high school, worked with a bunch of what was older guys to me back then, doing some stick framing, and that was fun for a while, but I knew that I needed something different. I knew that there had to be more craftsmanship or a different way to build things that had more spirit, that had more soul, something that as a kid in the early 70s, something I could wrap my arms around. And actually, I have to give my wife Sue credit. She brought home a book from the library by Eric Sloan, who's a pretty famous author and artist. Actually lived in Connecticut, in Warren, Connecticut. And the title of the book was A Diary of an Early American Boy. And it was actually 1 year in the life of a 12-year-old boy, 1806, and his name was Noah Blake. So reading that book and the diary that Noah Blake kept about his life in the summer and the winter and the fall and the spring of 1806, and the construction and the barn that they were building in their yard and the way their house was built and the whole farm aspect totally fascinated me. So 1975 is when my interest first started.
That's interesting. When did you have the chance to build your first timber frame or work on your first timber frame?
Luckily for me, it was the next year in 1976, which was a big deal. It was a big deal in our country that year because it was our country was 200 years old, right? 1776, 1976, and a gentleman who lived probably about a quarter mile from where we lived at the time in Northford was restoring, as I recall, it was like an 1810 structure. And I stopped by one day and just expressed some interest in helping him. And he was a couple of years older than me. He was a non-carpenter. I was a carpenter woodworker. So he was happy to, when I asked him if he needed help, at least I could provide help as far as skills of being able to cut a straight line and knowing how to measure something and basic carpentry skills. So he and I actually made a good team that summer, and I assisted him restoring his barn that summer of 1976. So that was my first hands-on experience with mortise and tenon joinery and carving white oak pegs by hand with a draw knife and finishing them off with a hand plane. So 1976 was my first practical experience and hands-on experience with a timber frame.
How many timber frames have you worked on since then?
Oh, that's a great question. This past summer, we completed our 48th and 49th timber frame. And so this coming summer, the summer of 2013, the Northford Timber Framers, we will actually do our 50th barn project. Which as I sit here, saying it out loud, I'm not sure if it seems like a lot or a little at this point. It seems kind of overwhelming when I think back. Believe it or not, I could recapture and recite all 50 projects. Some of them were large, some of them were small. We've had the extreme good fortune of meeting some wonderful people and great friends, many of whom came through our Northford Timber Frame class, and have become part of our group and have, of course, become very close friends with each other. We've had the absolute fortune of working in Maine and Vermont and Rhode Island and New York, Massachusetts, many states, in many towns in Connecticut. We've worked on lots of new stuff, lots of new designs, new structures, and my crowning jewel certainly has to be the 17th century frame that we dismantled that was in Milford, Connecticut, that certainly was a roots or first generation building, meaning that it was built by English timber framers with English tools and the apprenticeship that they had served to a master in England when they landed here on the coast in Connecticut. And the date that we put on that building, which is just over my shoulder here, we call it the addition, is actually 1680. So pretty remarkable, and such a gift that I was able to get my hands on the work of those timber frame masters from the 17th century. English tying joints that are dovetailed on top of gunstock timbers. So such an opportunity to work on that 1680 frame. I actually have goosebumps talking about it. It's just, was an amazing summer. It was an amazing project to dismantle. And in so many ways, it's as though my journey would not be complete at the end, whenever the end is. My journey would not have been complete without that 17th century structure. Because as I sit here, Amy, talking to you this morning, it means 5 centuries of timber framing that I've had the good grace and the honor to work on. So the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, the 20th century, and now in the 21st century. So, so that's kind of the realm of our experiences, you know, from 300 years ago up to the present.
That's a phenomenal history. Would you rather work on older frames, restorations, or newer frames, the new building?
When I was younger, I absolutely thrived working on restoring the work of timber frame masters. And that changed for me someplace in the late 80s. Not that I grew tired of saving our country's rich architectural history. That never grows old. But I had this desire to take what they had taught me from dismantling all these structures and turn that knowledge into my eye, into what I thought was practical, and to what I thought could work for, especially teaching it to others. So certainly what I learned from timber frame masters from the past who taught me, it's where I learned it from. I didn't learn it from a book that anybody wrote. There were no books, no how-to books about timber framing in the 70s. The group of timber framers that came up in the 70s were the roots and the foundation of the survival of this forgotten craft. So someplace in the late 80s, that experience that I'd had, that 10 plus years experience, wanted me to go out on my own and teach others to do things the way I learned, to pass this lesson on.